Stagflation. It's the latest buzzword you may be hearing in markets. It's a mashup of the words stagnation and inflation and describes an economy that's barely growing or even shrinking, has high unemployment, and rising prices. Stagflation is worse than a recession and is pretty much a nightmare for governments and central banks because their go-to prescriptions don't work and could make things worse. Think back to the 1970s when OPEC placed an oil embargo on the U.S., leading to a supply shock and price surge. Half a century later, is the U.S. now headed for stagflation as the Fed carries out its campaign to raise interest rates aggressively in order to bring down inflation? That's what the Fed wants to avoid. Ideally, it gets rates to a point where demand and a still strong job market slow enough to undercut inflation. And if the Fed does bring about a recession, policymakers will have room to lower rates to get the economy moving again. But ever higher rates increase everyone's borrowing costs and eventually lead to companies reducing expenses, which means job cuts. Europe and the UK may be at higher risk of entering stagflation, partly because their recovery from the pandemic was not as strong, and partly because higher rates won't do much to lower one of their biggest sources of inflation, energy prices, which have climbed because of Russia's war in Ukraine. This is Buzzwords. I'm Scarlett Fu.